In this debate, we should focus on how the U.S. should focus on stopping an arms race in the region without looking like the bad guy. Contention 1, provokes North Korea. That will backfire by provoking North Korea and starting an arms race. China Daily said that THAAD deployment is likely to trigger an arms race in the troubled region. The defense could become a blasting fuse rather than a guarding, as it would irritate the DPRK, which is already feeling insecure. The DPRK's past response to the U.S. hostile moves indicates that the reaction to THAAD would escalate the region's tensions, causing a vicious cycle in the Korean peninsula. This makes the war more likely. If North Korea feels provoked, then they will refuse to negate the possibility launch of a primitive strike. Jeong Zhang, the director of the Center of Korean Studies in the Fudan University, says the peninsula's peace and nuclearization should be achieved through reconciliation. That might provoke North Korea into developing high-tech retaliatory weapons and destroying the grounds for reconciliation. THAAD is more likely to develop an offensive weapon, posing a greater threat to international stability. Contention 2, China backlash. That deployment in the South Korea angers China by causing it builds more weapons. Shannon Tiaz, writing for The Diplomat, China's strenuous objective to deploy a THAAD, China believes that THAAD would also monitor Chinese missile development. Negations of the settings of the system of South Korea have sparked backlash in China, including dire wars of escalation that could spark a potential arms race in the region. THAAD deployment could create a vicious cycle of the Cold War-style confrontations and an arms race. I do not deny that THAAD would play a role in protecting South Korea, but it would inevitably target China and Russia. This has two impacts. First, Chinese nuclear buildup risks accidental nuclear war. Alexander Coben, writing for the PIR Center, says, if China were to build up its arsenal, it would have negative effects for the entire system of the regional security in the Asia-Pacific. Japan and South Korea might acquire their own nuclear capabilities. Such a move would also trigger a nuclear arms race between India and Pakistan, and have a very adverse impact on Russia-Chinese strategic dialogue. And a sharp increase would mean Beijing has abandoned its current defensive posture. China lacks reliable technical means for preventing unauthorized use of nuclear weapons. Second, it will start Korean War that we will lose, according to Sidney Freeberg, writing for the Breaking Defense. If we get into an arms race with China on the peninsula, we and South Korea will lose. The Chinese can win a fight by shipping cheap missile parts to North Korea faster than we can deploy THAAD. Contention 3, status quo solves. The U.S. should not deploy THAAD because South Korea is already producing its own missile defense. Benjamin Baker is writing for The Diplomat. South Korea is going indigenous in its attempt to upgrade its missile defense capabilities. Seoul is set on to complement the seaborne SM-2, which is indigenously designed and constructed missile. The KSAAM is a medium-ranged missile. It would act as a close protection warship. Another new addition to the KMD is the land-based Chiname-2 surface-to-air missile. This is set to complement the currently operating PAC-2 and 3s. There are also plans to develop an indigenous replacement for the Patriots. This performed twice the Patriot system. Plus, the U.S. has already given South Korea multiple types of missile defenses. Karen Montag, writing for the George Marshall Institute, notes, South Korea is currently being defended by systems that the U.S. owns and operates, and the rounds are okay. The U.S. Army maintains a number of systems in the U.S., a number of PAC batteries in South Korea. There are 16 Aegis destroyers assigned to the Pacific Fleet. U.S. also operates a THAAD in Guam.
Alright. Contention 1, prevents nuclear war. North Korean nuclear war is a real possibility. First, North Korea has recently done nuclear tests and has a growing stockpile of nuclear weapons. According to Bruce Klingner, writing for the Heritage Foundation, U.S. experts estimate that Pyongyang currently has 10 to 16 nuclear weapons. The Korean Institute has predicted the worst-case scenario of Pyongyang having at least 100 nuclear weapons by 2020. Secondly, they have recently made threats to launch their nuclear weapons. According to Al Jazeera, North Korea has pledged a sacred war of justice for reunification, including a nuclear strike against the U.S. Kim Jong-un ordered his country to be ready to use their nuclear weapons. We can't ignore these threats. Kim Jong-un might actually believe he could win a war. John Everett, former British ambassador to North Korea, said, "It's dangerous to assume that North Korea would really use a nuclear weapon. In the strange, closed world of North Korea, it's quite possible that the leadership has convinced itself that foreigners would not dare to counterattack if used a nuclear device." Lastly, THAAD is absolutely critical to stopping North Korean weapons of mass destruction. Current defense is not enough. Bruce Klinger continues, South Korea insists on relying on lower altitude interceptors, resulting in gaps of coverage that leave fewer citizens protected. At low altitude, even a successful interception of a nuclear, chemical, or biological warhead could result in the populace still being harmed. THAAD is designed to intercept ballistic missiles at exoatmospheric altitudes. THAAD would create an essential multi-layered defensive shield for South Korea. Contention 2 is bargaining chip. THAAD deployment is good because it gives the U.S. more negotiating power over China and North Korea. According to Henry Saw, writing for The Diplomat, THAAD can help reassure the United States that it could choose to pursue negotiations. THAAD adds value to the negotiation process as a future bargaining chip. Some analysis suggests that deploying THAAD could shape China's behavior, and once deployed, the removal of THAAD may be useful at the negotiating table with Pyongyang. THAAD deployment could be a novel way to speak to Pyongyang. This will lead to denuclearizing North Korea and possibly even the reunification of one Korea, according to Sungtae Park, writing in the national interest. If China takes tough measures to clamp down, then there might be a possibility of dismantling the Kim regime's nuclear and missile capabilities. At the least, Pyongyang would be weakened and isolated. Chinese cooperation on North Korea might even help pave the way to unification. And this has two impacts. First, this will create peace on the Korean peninsula. Second, North Korean nukes could be sold to ISIS or Syria if we don't remove them right away. Joel Witt and Jenny Townsend in The Atlantic. The more weapons Pyongyang has, the more dangerous instability becomes. Nuclear bombs could be smuggled abroad and sold to the highest bidder. North Korea's WMD programs pose serious security risks that will continue to grow if not addressed in a direct way. Contention 3 is South Korean nukes. South Korea is now considering developing its own nuclear arsenal to defend against North Korea, and the Fifth Field reports this in the Washington Post. Some politicians are openly wondering why South Korea shouldn't have its own weapons program. An effective and realistic countermeasure for dealing with North Korea's nuclear capability could entail South Korea developing nuclear weapons of its own. Experts said it could only take 18 months to turn plutonium from South Korea's nuclear power plants into a workable bomb. This could lead to a global nuclear arms race and ultimately undermine U.S. leadership. Major Frank Kaminsky writes for this in The Real Defense. A nuclear deal in South Korea would dramatically alter the regional balance of power and increase China, leading to a costly breakdown in Sino-South Korean relations. Japan would not tolerate being left out, and these effects may spill over into other regions, such as the Middle East. A nuclear-armed South Korea could also seal the growing perception that America's global leadership on important matters is waning. Thankfully, if the U.S. extends that to South Korea, we can still prevent South Korea from getting their own nuclear weapons. Bruce Klinger and Sally McNara of the Heritage Foundation argue the U.S. must significantly strengthen components of the U.S. missile defense. Missile defense would reassure our friends and our allies. Missile defense contributes to regional peace and stability. By reducing other nations' perceived need to acquire nuclear weapons, there we go.
Okay, shouldn't South Korea not get nukes shouldn't South Korea get nukes because then it would help them protect themselves?
Alright, even though it would help them protect themselves, let's say North Korea launched a nuclear weapon and South Korea had a counter defense. Both countries would have no benefit. But if we place THAAD in the region, not only do we intercept North Korea's missile, they're gone anyways, and South Korea is still safe, which is why we need THAAD in the region. Alright, so for your status quo solves contention, your PAC-2 and SM-3 only attack and intercept low to medium altitude interceptors. So what are you going to do about the high altitude ones that North Korea currently possesses?
Why would they want to? First of all, why would they want to use a high altitude missile on such a close region?
All right, number one, because they know that we don't have the defenses to intercept a high altitude region, and also they want to get at us, and they know we have defenses for low and middle altitude already.
But it's first of all, it's inefficient, and also we can still prevent them from actually hitting the ground, and we can deflect them away with our PAC-2 and PAC-3 missiles.
All right, okay. Do you have a question?
Yeah, okay. Why would North Korea want to give up their nukes if we already tried to bargain with them, and how would the bargaining chip even help?
Alright, so our bargaining chip is saying that we can control areas like China and North Korea. So addressing your point about North Korean nukes, they won't give up their nukes, which is why we already tried sanctions and everything, but that will be better, because not only can we control their nukes, even if they launch them, they're going to be intercepted by THAAD anyway. So they have no point in using their nukes, which means we don't have to worry about their nuclear program or their continuous threats against South Korea, them threatening to launch their nuclear weapons at the U.S. and South Korea.
But then why can't they just have a bunch of ballistic missiles and fire them at the North or South Korea and wasting the THAAD?
What do you mean?
THAAD is like as been stated in our contention. China can just cheap missile parts and faster than we can deploy THAAD in South Korea.
Alright, but let me point out, China backlash contention. China has sanctioned North Korea. They're not exactly in a friendly relationship right now. There would be no reason for China to go ahead and start shipping these cheap warhead parts over to North Korea. That's just illogical as for right now.
Well, the last time we put sanctions, China also put sanctions on North Korea, but didn't follow them.
Alright, but China put sanctions on North Korea. That's the phrase you should have emphasis on. If we put sanctions on a certain country, that means that we don't particularly like them. So once China puts down sanctions to North Korea, they're saying that we should limit your nuclear program and that we don't like that.
How do you know China was just not trying to get on better relations with,
But we currently have evidence saying that China does, well, they place sanctions on North Korea. So you're trying to turn this argument on me, but I don't get why a country would put sanctions on another one to improve relations with North Korea.
Okay, you might
All
have
right.
a question.
So, for your provokes North Korea contention, isn't North Korea already provoked as of right now? If they're making all these threats?
But it's like poking an already angry bear. If you have an angry bear and you're like taunting it or like taunting somebody who's already mad, they wouldn't want to they just get even angrier and have even retaliate even more.
Okay.
I'd like to start off the response to speeches by reminding everyone that the first two contentions of their argument do not fit within our framework. Our framework is that we should stop an arms race whenever possible, and preventing a nuclear war and the bargaining chip do not fit under our framework. Only South Korea nukes does, which we have several responses to. Now, with that in mind, I'd like to start with the response to prevent nuclear war. One, it's overrated. The weapons capability of Pyongyang is limited. Keep in mind that 10 to 16 nuclear weapons that may not even be functional in the first place is something we can deal with. Pyongyang does not have the military power to start a large war, and even if they did, their infrastructure is too poor to actually do anything. Two. There won't be a nuclear war. North Korea is not suicidal. North Korea would never actually use a nuke because they know the use would eliminate them forever. Kim Jong-un wants to keep his power, so he won't start a nuclear war. He makes nuclear threats every single year, and he never actually used one. Remember the 2013 scare where everyone thought North Korea would nuke us? It never happened. Each nuclear test and each threat they've made, they've never followed up on. Nothing has happened. And during no time has North Korea actually done something to harm us. And the 2013 fiasco proves that North Korea would not be stupid enough to actually start a war. They came close to doing it, but they never did it. Now, three. Again, I'd like to reiterate, there won't be a nuclear war because they're not suicidal. Just because they're not crazy enough to use the weapons. Again, they've made several threats and they have not followed up on any of them. Finally, third response. Darn it, I need to make my system better. Third response. North Korea wouldn't dare start a nuclear war anyway because it would harm North Korea. The US and Russia alone have about 7,000 nukes, and they have 20. If the fallout doesn't kill them, we will. North Korea would not only North Korea have massive retaliation if the war was started, but the fallout created by bombing South Korea would also devastate North Korea. Now, with that in mind, I'd like to go to the bargaining chip argument. Now, one. It's not that powerful. That can do damage, but it's not that great. It's like threatening someone with a needle or a safety pin. Sure, it can hurt, but it's not that powerful. Besides, the range isn't that great anyway. Two. North Korea will never give up their nukes no matter how much power the US has. North Korea won't give up their nukes or reunify. North Korea is not, according to Daniel Petrus, North Korea is not at all interested in denuclearization. And just into remarks from Kim himself, that North Korea would never willingly disarm itself. It would be the point of insanity from North Korea's point of view to voluntarily give away the one weapon that guarantees Washington or South Korea would refrain from a regime change. Three. That will backfire, since it will anger China and North Korea will make them even less likely to negotiate with the US and South Korea. The US cannot expect North Korea to negotiate when we are sticking weapons in their face. This is only going to provoke North Korea and make them build even more nukes. Now, I'd like to go back to South Korean nukes, which is the only one that actually fits our framework. One. It won't happen. South Korea will not build nuclear weapons. Troy Stangaroni, Senior Director for the Congress Affairs and Trade in North Korea Institute of America, says that South Korea is developing its own nuclear deterrent that would be unprecedented. No state with a mutual defense treaty with the United States has acquired a nuclear weapon yet, and South Korea would be in violation of its NPT responsibilities. It would likely find itself unable to drop on the nuclear suppliers group, and it would also find itself in violation of a civilian nuclear agreement with the US. The development would likely end South Korea's goals of becoming a nuclear exporter. South Korea would also likely face either bilateral or multilateral economic sanctions. There is no reason to believe that the US nuclear umbrella is reliable. Two. Wait, what? Oh, sorry. Two. The U.S. image would become even worse if South Korea would become even worse. One, imperialism. If we want to prevent imperialism, whatever we can do. That would show the world that the U.S. is still an imperialistic power. And in a time when the U.S. is considered the big bad wolf of the world, this is a bad thing. We want to make sure the U.S. does not put that in South Korea because that actually makes our image worse by imperialism. Two, an arms race. Again, it would start an arms race. When putting that in North Korea, it starts an arms race. And because we would be seen as responsible for this arms race, it would make our image even worse. Finally, last response. Darn it. Number 2. THAAD isolates and targets South Korea, and it picks a target on South Korea's back. By putting THAAD in South Korea, it points South Korea out to the rest of the world. The U.S. would not show it as powerful because it would just isolate South Korea from everyone. That would make the U.S. a warmonger, and we don't want that. That is why their contentions are falsy.
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to respond to my opponent's framework, which they said we should focus on an arms race. But I have a couple responses to this. One, this is not all about an arms race. We are talking about the entire world and the effect in the future. By only focusing on an arms race, you're only focusing on a small part of this debate. The main topic of this debate is do the benefits of THAAD outweigh the harms? That's including all the harms and all the benefits. So we could include any points in this debate. 3, THAAD doesn't even start a nuclear race. So first off, let's respond to their first contention. I have a couple responses here. 1, that is not the cause of an arms race. North Korea's nuclear testing is causing this arms race, so we cannot stop them. Daily Volian writing for the Common Dreams. The new test by the PKRD, another including the ability to prevent states of process and the nuclear war. This could lead to an arms race and more dangerous and we would face in the Cold War. 2, countries are already provoked. They're still testing nuclear weapons like North Korea. THAAD can't use this anymore. THAAD will be able to stop North Korea and give up greater defense systems against the weapons, so they'll be safer. 3, even if North Korea is provoked, there is a whole other reason to put in THAAD because THAAD is used for defense. 4, if North Korea launches a missile strike, there is no longer a resistance to North Korea. That's why they will not shoot one in the first place. 5, putting THAAD won't automatically make North Korea launch their weapons and feel aggressive. 6, that is a defensive measure and a guard of the missile. North Korea is unlikely to feel overwhelmed and protected by the launching of missile when THAAD is only used as a defensive system. Now I'd like to go on to respond to my opponent's second contention, which was China backlash. I have a couple responses. 1, China won't be mad. That is not threatening China. Ben China writing for his senior research fellow of the Northwest Asian Studies of the Center of Heritage Foundation. Beijing claims that deployment would go against the China's security intents and overlooking North Korea's development in the nuclear lesson. It could interest the Chinese ICBM territories in exceeding the THAAD interceptor range, altitude, and speed capabilities. THAAD and the Expander radar could not see and track the ICBM's radar. This could also include a 90-degree arc, which would detect North Korea. 2, THAAD helps China. By putting missile defenses close to China, it will contain them and give them reason to cooperate with the U.S. China will help us and proceed with North Korea and stop their nuclear program from expanding. 3, there's no reason for China to sternly start shooting missiles at the United States. They won't be attacked by THAAD. 4, they still will be friends. China's not willing to lose one of the biggest negotiating powers and one of the biggest superpowers in the world like the US. 5, they won't harm the peninsula at all. Yes, sir, it'll have a small effect, but it's not really going to do anything. It'll have a small effect or not an impact at all. Now I'd like to go on to respond to my opponent's next contention, which was the status quo solves. I have a couple responses to this. First off, 1, it's not enough. South Korea's missile defense is only low altitude currently. That means that North Korea's nukes are easy to get around in launching the successful attacks. Our evidence from Booth Counter proves this. All soldiers who won't be able to start a nuclear war. 2, the benefits outweigh the benefits to that. It can be used as a bargaining chip and give the US more power, and it can help us contain China. It would prevent South Korea from getting their own nukes and protecting them. Currently, defensive solves none of these problems, and that would be a huge improvement to solving this. 3, it's not enough defense in South Korea to protect the country if North Korea launches ever an attack. That's why we should put that in the first place, and it'll solve this problem effectively. 5, there's no guaranteed success rate. The Patriots and Anglo defense systems currently, in the missile hits, there's a war falling out over at East Asia. So the U.S. has to put in that into production. 5, South Korea is under the U.S. umbrella. They would do anything in their power in order to keep them from blowing up off the face of the earth. That's why we should put in place that again. 6, it is a moral and political obligation for the United States to protect weaker and more unequipped countries in the southeast with missile defense systems. We cannot let the North Koreans have the slight chance and causing many deaths around the Korean Peninsula. So as you see, judges, I've clearly taken down all of my opponent's points and all of mine stand, even though I've also taken down their framework, which were including all the harms and all the benefits that could be brought up in this debate. Thank you.
Would you like the first contention?
Give me a question?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so you said there is no giving up. North Korea is most likely not going to give up their nukes, right?
Yeah, they're not.
Okay, so what are we going to do then to stop North Korea from bombing and blowing up South Korea?
Well, we've already proven that they're not suicidal. You see, we've looked at everything North Korea has done, and they have made several threats in the past, but they have never actually enacted on those. There's no threat with North Korea nuking us, so the question is pointless.
Okay, so you're telling me that a country which is willing to spend more money on their nuclear program and then their 10 million starving citizens is not suicidal?
They're not suicidal. They're
Even though
crazy,
they're
but they're
doing
not
that.
suicidal.
Okay, so what makes you think if they're crazy, that automatically means they could come up with crazy ideas. It's automatically logical if they're spending millions and millions and millions of dollars putting into their nuclear program to build up a nuclear arsenal, that they're going to use it as some kind of an advantage to them, aren't they?
Well, no, because think of it this way: the Soviet Union has remember that everyone knows about the Soviet Union. They built several nuclear weapons, and in fact, the Soviet Union had a much greater chance of taking us out. And they had millions starving, just like North Korea. But they didn't. In fact, they had a greater chance of winning, and they still didn't.
Yes, because Soviet Union wasn't suicidal. We're dealing with a country here that has no allies anymore. China's put sanctions on them. Other countries have put sanctions on them. They have no clear friends. They automatically know that they're going to be punished, so they're going to go for as far down as they can.
If they know they're going to be punished, they're not going to start a nuclear war.
That's the point. If we continue to let them proliferate and gain nuclear weapons, and what are other countries going to think? They're going to think, wow, the U.S. isn't going to do anything about this. We're just going to let this happen. Don't you think this is not a superpower's idea of how to protect the world and its countries?
Well, if we do something, we just look like a more imperial power, which makes relations with South Korea worse, and it also makes relations with China worse.
How is putting a missile defense system that protects a country making them look bad?
Because it's still a missile defense system. It's something big, dangerous, powerful.
Okay, here's where you're wrong, because you were talking in your contention. You said that that'll be most likely used as an offensive weapon. But that's not the purpose of THAAD. That is used as a high-altitude missile to be able to stop North Korea from launching any missiles at low altitudes, and South Korea has low altitudes, and putting THAAD in place will give them high altitudes, giving them full protection. So why would THAAD, if its main purpose is a defense system, be used as an offensive measure?
Well, China and North Korea don't know that. For all they know, we could be putting a spy system in the middle of Korea, and that would destroy their infrastructure.
What makes you think that the U.S. would even lie about anything like that?
The U.S. has lied several times in the past. It's what superpowers do.
Okay, but it's not something a superpower would do if they're putting a country's life at risk. North Korea is going to do something about it. If the U.S. is lying, it'll show. The U.S. is not gambling when they're willing to spend a lot of money putting into THAAD and defending a country that is threatened day in and day out by a country that is clearly crazy.
We've displaced millions of Native Americans, and we've shot kids with napalm in Vietnam. I think we have the track record to do something terrible like spy.
But why would we spy when we're putting a defense system in place from stopping someone?
Why wouldn't we?
3, 2, 1. Okay, first I'm gonna say that they didn't respond to our framework correctly because they didn't show how their framework is better than ours. And now I'm going to say how our framework is better. Our framework is better because, first of all, we have to look at it from the U.S.'s point of view. If we have to look at it from the U.S. point of view because we are the U.S. We live in the U.S. And so we have to see how it benefits the U.S., not how it benefits China or North Korea. Now I'm going to respond to their response to our first contention. First, they said that nuclear testing is not causing an arms race, but actually, there's nuclear testing now, and there is no arms race. They also said it'll stop North Korea, but that will not stop North Korea because North Korea will just use different ways to attack. They also said that is defensive, but that can be, and so they won't be threatened, but that can be used as an offensive weapon. It can also and it is also it's a threat. It's almost nearly threatening other countries because it's a missile defense. Also, they also said that's not a threat, but that is a threat to other countries. They said it's only going to be used defensively, but as I stated before, it can be threatening. They also, against trying to backlash, they also responded that it's not threatening again, as it cross-applied what I said before. They also said that it also actually contains China, but only contains a small part of China. It doesn't matter. They also said that China won't attack us, but China is a large threat and can cause a lot of problems. In status quo, the first response, that was only low altitude and that we need more, but we don't need more.
This is so loud. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Alright, so first I'm going to address their framework. They accuse us of responding to their framework incorrectly and that we don't have clash with our own framework. I'd like to point out that we don't have a framework, but we're just trying to say that the benefits should outweigh the harms if we place THAAD. Now moving on to our first contention, which is preventing nuclear war. If we place THAAD in South Korea, this will intercept missiles that North Korea could possibly launch, and this will stop a major nuclear war. They respond to this in 3 ways. First up, they say that it's overrated. However, 10 to 16 nuclear weapons is enough to wipe out a world. It is definitely not overrated in any way. 2, they say that there will be no nuclear war because North Korea is not suicidal. Cross-supplier John Everard evidence, which says that North Korea has brainwashed their own government into thinking that they could win a war. 3, they say that this would harm North Korea themselves, but go back to what I was saying earlier, that they are suicidal and they will launch these weapons. Our second contention was bargaining chip, which is basically saying that we can control our political competitors like China using THAAD. They responded to this also in 3 ways. Number 1, they said it's not powerful enough. However, THAAD can control missile and nuclear threats. This means that we have a large defensive bargaining chip to use against countries like China and Russia. 2, they said that North Korea will never give up their nukes. Exactly. This is why we need THAAD, because we never know when they're going to give up their nukes, and that means we're never going to know when they're going to launch them, or we're never going to know when they're going to hit South Korea and cause a lot of casualties and human rights violations. 3, they said that THAAD will backfire. However, THAAD will guide other foreign countries as a bargaining chip. That is defensive, and there will not be a lot of backlash. Our third contention is South Korean nukes, which is basically saying that without that, South Korea will start building on nukes, and this is bad. To which we respond in 3 ways. They say that 1, it won't happen, but if the US doesn't reinforce its nuclear umbrella, then it's not good for South Korea. 2, they say imperialism, but placing that to protect a country is not imperialism. B, they say that it will cause an arms race, but that won't cause an arms race because we know that intercepts missiles. They logically won't start making more. 3, they say that it undermines US leadership, but protecting a country from a nuclear threat does not harm US leadership. Therefore, the benefits of THAAD outweigh the harms.
Okay, ready to go.
Now.
Okay, you guys may ask the first question.
Okay, wait, do you have a question?
I thought you had a question.
Okay, well, if,
Okay, can we ask a question? If
Alright,
you're-
yeah, fine.
Okay, so my first question is, how are we going to change THAAD from a defensive missile that has been tested more than 11 times into an offensive weapon?
well, first of all, it's, by offensive, we're not saying that we're gonna destroy North Korea's targets. We're saying that it's threatening them in an offensive way.
How is
But we have ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons lying around. Why would we ever decide to use THAAD as an offensive system?
Well, we don't. If we were to put that in place, it wouldn't be defensive. But other countries don't know that. China and North Korea would obviously take it as a sign of harm. Look, if China put a missile defense system in Mexico and told us they promised it wasn't going to do anything to us, what would you think? You'd think China was spying on us. Any logical person would.
How would you spy with the missile defense system?
You can have radar systems.
Okay, but as we've already stated in our response speech, and that only creates a 90-degree arc, which does not go into any major parts of China. It only covers a very small area, which China also agreed that has nothing to do with any of their nuclear program. It only goes into North Korea, so what relevance does that have to do anything with harming China?
Well,
How do
first,
they know it only has a 90-degree arc? How do they know we super promised to keep it at a 90-degree arc? They can't trust us.
Because the U.S. is not full of lies. The U.S. government and the Chinese government aren't on the best agreements, but they are still allies. And losing China as an ally, the U.S. knows if they lie to China, they're going to be in trouble. So,
And also, placing such missile defense system without telling them the clear details is technically violating maritime law. So,
well, also, if Russia feels threatened if we put THAAD in,
how does
South
Russia
Korea.
have anything to do with South Korea when that doesn't even to go into areas of Russia?
but they still feel threatened.
How?
Well, they
It's
feel
having
like
nothing to do with China. Here's the point. My opponents keep on bringing up the argument that this has something to do with China. This has something to do with Russia. But there's no offensive measure to this weapon. This weapon is only for defensive purpose and will cause no harm to China or Russia at all.
Alright,
No,
you guys
we're
have a-
That
focusing
proves
on-
our point. Because they think it's only a defensive measure. We could put any number of things in that and they wouldn't
Alright.
notice.
Do you
It's
understand
worse.
what that is? It's a high altitude interception missile.
Yes, but we could disguise something
Alright,
in
do you
the
guys,
form of
do
that.
you guys have a question?
okay, yes, why would North Korea want to get rid of their nukes if we've already tried in the past?
Alright, so right here, in your second response to bargaining chip, you say that North Korea will never give up their nukes. So can you explain the clash that you guys are contradicting yourself right now?
What do you
What do you mean? We're
Alright,
saying
so
that
your
we
second
won't.
response to bargaining chip, you guys said North Korea will never give up their nukes. Is that what you're trying to ask me right now?
Yeah,
You
Alright.
said North Korea will give up nukes.
yeah.
No, we're saying that placing THAAD will prevent a nuclear war if they ever decide to launch their nukes.
Well,
No, but okay.
we've already proven they've made several threats, and none of them have ever come to fruition. They're not suicidal. If they were suicidal, they would have attacked.
Then why are they spending millions and billions of dollars into their nuclear program and starving their citizens when they have a massive problem on their hands?
Because they're trying to inflict fear in the U.S. They're trying to.
Okay, so then why don't we put THAAD into place, putting fear into their eyes and solving our problem?
Because then they'll make more weapons to employ more fear. All right. I'd like to rehearse my final focus by restating our framework. 1, the U.S. needs to stop an arms race. An arms race would do incredible harm to the world, and as you have stated, it's not entirely about the U.S. While we want to preserve the U.S.'s interest, we must also stop an arms race because the arms race is the most damaging thing there is. By putting that in place, we employ an imperialistic view to the world, and by putting that in place, we risk aggravating China and North Korea, which would make the entire thing worse. But by putting that up, the imperialism increases, and by stopping an arms race, we do more to solve the world's problems by doing less. Stopping an arms race by not putting that in place is a win-win situation. We do less, we risk no one, and finally, we stop the arms race that threatens the world. That is an offensive weapon. Even if we make it defensive, they will still think it is offensive. Now, I'd like to go over why that is useless. 1, lies. They don't know what is in that. No matter what we can promise to China and North Korea, they don't know what is in that. We could have a radar that stretches into Beijing for all they know about, and they still wouldn't know because we super promised to them that we would not have that. Also, the U.S. has a track record of lying and doing bad things before. The U.S. may have some honesty in it, but we have done several things in the past. We've sprayed children with napalm in Vietnam. We have fought several wars with our own people before. This is not something new. The U.S. does lie. Finally, also, South Korea wouldn't build nukes. As we've already stated, they would cost too much. They're already under the nuclear umbrella. Putting a nuke in South Korea would make South Korea look terrible. They would employ sanctions. It would employ madness. It would cost too much. South Korea has our protection. There's no reason for them to go any further. And China's backlash would happen because, again, lies. They wouldn't know what we put in that, even if it's purely defensive. And that is also starting an arms race because we're showing them that we have the capability to fight back, which makes them want to fight back more. By pushing them further down, they'll try to drag us down as well. That is why that is ultimately useless. It's a $1.25 billion waste to making more aggravated nations. And, time's up anyway.
Okay, at the end of the day, the pro teams in this debate, I have 2 voting issues. My first voting issue is our first contention, nuclear war, and our third contention, South Korea. Okay, so our first contention is going over prevents nuclear war. By putting that in place, that is a defensive measure, as we've already stated multiple times, and will be able to stop a nuclear war from happening. South Korea already currently has low-altitude missiles, and by putting that in place, it gives them full protection because that is high-altitude missiles. Now, my opponents responded to this by saying, well, this will happen, and it won't actually start a nuclear war, and North Korea is not crazy. But when a country is willing to spend more money on their nuclear program than their civilians, it obviously means they're crazy and they're willing to do a lot. Now, our third contention was South Korea prevent South Korea from getting nukes. South Korea is under the nuclear umbrella, and if they feel provoked by China, by North Korea or anything, they want to build up their nuclear program. This is likely to happen because they won't feel protected by the U.S. Now, I'd like to go up into the framework of this debate. My opponents keep on saying we should only focus on our arms race, but as I already stated, the actual statement in this debate is do the benefits outweigh the harms, and that means all the benefits and all the offense. Now, I'd like to go on to my opponent's arguments and look at them. So first off, it was arms race. My opponent didn't respond to number 2, 3, 4, or 5 on this list, which included already provoked. There's nothing North Korea is really going to do more, and by putting that in place, it will stop them, which means they have no more response at that point, taking down their main argument about starting an arms race if you go with their framework. China backlash, they didn't respond to that actually helps China. It's stopping North Korea from gaining nuclear weapons and building up their nuclear arsenal, solving the problem, and China will not have a problem with this. Now, they didn't respond to our status quo argument, and this is a big deal because their status quo argument is the only thing they have left on the table. That will stop anything from happening. Without putting that in the region, you're letting North Korea have high-altitude missiles that will be able to hit South Korea, putting millions of lives at stake. Millions of lives could be lost, and at the end of the day, it's a big lose situation if you go with the con team. So if you go for the pro team, you're putting that in place, which will defend North Korea, help China, help keep stability in the region, and if you go for the con team, they have no more arguments. You're most likely going to cause more harm and damage with this. That's why at the end of the day, the pro team wins this debate.